The check lay on the table like a tombstone, stark and white against the dark wood. A single, vicious slash of black ink cut through the tip line. 0. A gaping, deliberate, soul-crushing 0. Across the opulent dining room of Aurelia, Amelia could feel the smirks of the other servers, a wave of second-hand humiliation that was hotter than the steam rising from the bus tub. Julian Croft, the aerospace magnate they called the Ghost of Silicon Valley, rose from his seat, his movements as precise and silent as the drones his company built. He walked out, leaving Amelia, a single mother whose hope for the week had been pinned on this one table, with nothing but the wreckage of a $900 meal and a heart full of acid. Tears, hot and shameful, pricked at the corners of her eyes. That tip. That was Leo's co-pay for the cardiologist. It was the overdue electric bill. It was the difference between a full pantry and another week of watered-down soup. Her hand trembled as she reached for his dinner plate, a surge of pure, impotent rage making her snatch it up. As the heavy porcelain lifted, a small, square piece of folded cardstock, previously hidden, slid onto the tablecloth. It wasn't cash. It was a handwritten note, penned in an architect's sharp, clean script. It contained not words, but a sequence of numbers and a single symbol that would detonate her life. And the man who left it? He wasn't just a difficult customer. He was a lock, and Amelia was about to discover she might just be the only key. The dinner service at Aurelia, perched atop a skyscraper in downtown Austin, was less about hospitality and more about surviving a nightly siege. Amelia Tran, wiping sweat from her temple with the back of a wrist, moved through the controlled chaos with a practiced economy of motion. Her feet, encased in department store black flats that had long since given up their ghost of a cushion, sent shooting pains up her shins. 8 hours down, 4 to go. The dull, familiar ache was a constant companion, a physical manifestation of her life's precarity. "Tran, table 7 needs a fresh bottle of the Sancerre, on the double," hissed Mr. Davies, the floor manager. Davies was a man who seemed perpetually inflated, his chest puffed out with a self-importance his meager authority couldn't possibly justify. He wore cologne that smelled aggressively of sandalwood and desperation. He resented Amelia for her quiet competence, for the fact that she never engaged in the staff gossip, for the simple reason that her exhaustion left no room for the sycophancy he demanded. She had to catch the last express bus to the suburbs to relieve the elderly woman who watched her son. "Right away, Mr. Davies," Amelia replied, her voice a flat, even line. She grabbed the chilled bottle, the condensation, a brief, welcome shock against her warm skin. As she presented the wine to the couple at table 7, who were too engrossed in their phones to offer a flicker of acknowledgement, her thoughts drifted to the envelope tucked in her locker. It was a letter from Leo's school, a gentle but firm reminder that his tuition for the specialized program, the one with an on-site nurse who could handle his arrhythmia, was 2 months past due. Her 6-year-old son, Leo, was the sun around which her broken world orbited. He had been born with a heart that beat to its own chaotic rhythm, a tiny, flawed metronome. A new experimental procedure, a cardiac ablation that promised to remap the faulty electrical pathways, was his best hope for a normal life. But it wasn't fully covered by her state-sponsored insurance. She needed to save a staggering $5,000 for the deposit alone. Tonight, before Croft's table, her tips amounted to $62. "Psst, Amy." She turned. Tiffany, another waitress, was leaning against the service bar, reapplying a layer of shimmering lip gloss. Tiffany was all sharp angles and calculated smiles, an expert at leveraging her youth and flirtatiousness into hefty tips from the tech bros and oil barons who frequented Aurelia. "What is it, Tiff?" Amelia asked, her hands automatically straightening a stack of cocktail napkins. "Guess who just sat in the eagle's nest?" Tiffany said with a malicious grin, nodding toward the most coveted table in the restaurant, a secluded booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. Davies said it's Julian Croft. Amelia's blood went cold. The entire city knew that name. Julian Croft wasn't just a billionaire. He was a legend, a recluse who had revolutionized satellite technology and autonomous flight. He was famous for his genius and his utter intolerance for mediocrity. The business journals called him the Phantom Engineer, a man who could spot 1/100th of a degree flaw in a turbine blade from 10 feet away. "Why aren't you taking him?" Amelia asked, her suspicion piqued. Tiffany lived for the whale tables. A tip from a man like Croft could be a mortgage payment. Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. "Are you crazy? I served him once at a private event. He's a walking nightmare. He complained that the ice cubes in his water were cloudy, implying impurities in the filtration system. He doesn't tip, Amy. He interrogates. He dissects. I've got that table of loud real estate developers. They're 3 martinis deep and trying to impress their clients. Easy money." She pressed a heavy, leather-bound menu into Amelia's hands. "You take the Phantom. Have fun." Amelia watched her walk away, the sway of her hips a victory march. She glanced at the corner booth. Refusing a table was a fireable offense, and losing this job wasn't an option, not with Leo's heart ticking like a tiny, fragile time bomb. She took a breath, smoothed the front of her apron, and began the long walk across the dining room. Julian Croft was studying the water glass on his table as if it held the secrets of the universe. His face, illuminated by the soft glow of the table lamp, was stark and severe. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too sharp, his expression too intense. He wore a simple, dark grey sweater of some impossibly fine material, a quiet statement of wealth that screamed louder than any designer logo. His hair was dark, shot with silver at the temples, and his eyes, when they finally lifted to meet hers, were a pale, piercing grey, like a winter sky. They didn't just look at her. They scanned her, processed her, and filed her away. "Good evening, sir," Amelia began, the professional smile feeling like a mask on her tired face. "Welcome to Aurelia. My name is Amelia, and I'll be your server this evening. May I start you with some water?" "You already have," he stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone with no trace of warmth. He tapped a long finger on the table. "And it's vibrating." Amelia blinked. "Sir?" "The table. There's a harmonic resonance, a low-frequency vibration. I can feel it through the stem of the glass. It's coming from the kitchen ventilation system. The mounting bolts on the main exhaust fan are likely unevenly torqued, causing a micro-wobble. It's distracting." Amelia stood frozen for a beat. It was the most bizarre complaint she had ever heard. But as she focused, shutting out the clatter of the dining room, she could feel it too. A barely perceptible hum, a ghost of a tremor beneath her feet. Her late husband, Ben, had been a master mechanic, a man who could diagnose an engine by sound alone. He had taught her to listen, to feel, to notice the small things, the tiny imperfections that signaled bigger problems. "Everything has a rhythm, Ames," he used to say. "You just have to find the beat that's out of step." Instead of getting defensive, she leaned down slightly, placing her fingertips on the edge of the table. She closed her eyes for a second. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet. "It's about a 60 hertz cycle. You can feel it more on the east side of the table." Croft's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch. It was the first sign of any expression other than stern disapproval. "I'll speak to the manager," she said. "But as a temporary solution." She walked to a nearby service station and returned with 2 cork coasters. She knelt, a sharp pain shooting through her knee, and carefully wedged them under 2 of the table legs, making minute adjustments. She stood up and placed her hand on the table again. The vibration was gone, dampened by the cork. "Is that better, sir?" He picked up his water glass, watching the surface of the water. It was perfectly still. He gave a single, curt nod. "Acceptable. For now." Amelia felt a small, strange victory. "Are you ready to order, Mr. Croft?" "I want the pan-seared scallops," he said, not glancing at the menu. "But I want them seared for precisely 45 seconds on the first side and 30 on the second. The pan must be cast iron, heated to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And the lemon butter sauce, use clarified butter only, and the juice of a Meyer lemon, not a Eureka. The acidity is less aggressive." It was a test, a series of impossible, pedantic demands designed to make her fail. "Our chef is quite particular about his preparations, sir." Croft's grey eyes locked onto hers. "Amelia, is your chef's ego more important than a guest's request?" The implied threat was clear. "Make it happen, or there will be consequences." "I will convey your exact specifications to the chef, sir," she said, her voice tight. The kitchen was, as expected, a storm of fury. Chef Antoine, a man with a temper as fiery as his sauces, threw a towel against the wall. "Meyer lemons, 45 seconds. Does he think this is a laboratory or a kitchen? Who is this man?" "It's Julian Croft, chef," Amelia pleaded, keeping her voice low. "Please, just this once. He's observant." Antoine muttered a string of French curses, but fired up a small, cast-iron skillet. Amelia spent the next 10 minutes as a nervous intermediary, timing the sear with the clock on her phone, ensuring the butter was clarified, and personally selecting the smoothest, yellow-orange Meyer lemon from the pantry. She delivered the plate with the care of a bomb disposal expert. "Your scallops, Mr. Croft, prepared as you requested." He didn't acknowledge her. He picked up his fork, speared a single scallop, and examined it from all angles before taking a bite. He chewed slowly, his expression unreadable. He swallowed. "The sear is adequate," he finally pronounced. "The sauce is balanced." Amelia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked, hoping the answer was no. "Yes," he said, finally looking directly at her. "A problem." She was taken aback. "I'm sorry?" "I'm going to give you a hypothetical engineering problem," he said, his tone shifting from that of a customer to a professor. "Imagine a sealed lubrication system for a gyroscopic stabilizer. The system is consistently losing 1.7% of its fluid volume per 1,000 hours of operation. There are no external leaks. The seals are perfect. The temperature is stable. Where is the fluid going?" Amelia stared at him, bewildered. This was beyond bizarre. It was insane. Staff were supposed to be invisible, not participate in engineering quizzes. She looked around. Davies was watching them from across the room, his face a mask of suspicion. "Sir, I'm just a waitress," she stammered. A waitress who diagnosed a 60 Hertz vibration and understood the dampening properties of cork, he countered. "You see details. So, see this. Where does the fluid go?" Her mind flashed back to late nights in the garage with Ben, the smell of oil and metal in the air. He'd be working on an old motorcycle, explaining the intricate dance of its mechanics. He had a thing for gyroscopes. He'd even built a small one for Leo out of old parts. "Maybe," she began hesitantly, the words coming from a dusty corner of her memory. Maybe it's not disappearing. Maybe it's changing. If the system has components made of different alloys, could a microscopic electrolytic reaction be breaking down the fluid at a molecular level? It wouldn't be a leak you could see. It would just become a different, thinner substance. A gas, maybe. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Julian Croft stared at her, his face utterly blank. For a terrifying moment, she thought she had offended him, that she had crossed some invisible line and would be fired on the spot. He slowly picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth. "The check," he said, his voice flat again, the strange moment of connection severed. She returned with the bill folder. He placed his credit card inside without looking at it and handed it back. She ran the card, her hands shaking slightly. As she placed the receipt and the pen on the small silver tray, he was already standing up, slipping on a light jacket. He walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. The receipt lay on the tray. Total, $917 or $40. She looked down at the tip line, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and a tiny, foolish flicker of hope. Maybe he appreciated the conversation, the problem-solving. The line was a brutal black scar. Tip $0, total $917.40. Tough break, Tran. Tiffany's voice was a poisoned dart in her ear. Told you he was a monster. $0 on $1,000. That's got to be a record. The room swam before Amelia's eyes. 0. After the vibration, the scallops, the insane engineering test, nothing. It was a calculated act of cruelty. It was a statement. You are worthless. Clear the table, Tran, Davies barked from the host stand. We need to turn it over. Amelia moved toward the table, her body feeling heavy, her spirit crushed. She felt like a fool, a gullible, desperate fool. She began stacking the dishes, the clink of silverware sounding unnaturally loud in her ears. She picked up the heavy charger plate he had used, ready to sling it into the bus tub. And that's when she saw it. Tucked neatly underneath, where no one would find it until the table was fully cleared, was a folded piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. Her first thought was that he'd left some insulting complaint. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. It wasn't a complaint, it wasn't an apology, it was a sequence of numbers and a single symbol. Bell 40 total 7-1, Tuatua Yargen, 74 Pononzo Siseso 60, 8 1 Ahozaho. Beneath it, in the same precise script, were 2 words. Your answer. What's that? Tiffany asked, craning her neck. Nothing, Amelia said, her voice a choked whisper. She crumpled the note in her fist, shoving it deep into her apron pocket. Just trash. He left his trash. As she cleared the last of the glasses, her mind raced, trying to decipher the cryptic message. A coordinate. A code. Your answer. An answer to what? The engineering problem? Or an answer to the unasked question that screamed in her soul every single night? How am I going to save my son? The bus ride home was a blur of streetlights and shadows. Amelia sat with her head against the cool glass, the crumpled note a hot, secret coal in her pocket. 40-571-28 again, 74.060 W. She typed the numbers into her phone's map. The pin dropped squarely on Lower Manhattan, New York City. That was impossible. She was in Austin. It had to mean something else. She thought about the second part of the code, 8081C. It looked like a part number, or maybe a storage unit. Ben had notebooks filled with similar codes, schematics for engines, parts catalogues. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Ben, sitting at their small kitchen table, poring over declassified government auction sites. He had a fascination with old aerospace technology. What are you looking for? She'd asked him once. A ghost, he'd replied with a grin. Project 808, an old Cold War drone prototype. They called it the Icarus, supposedly revolutionary, but the project was scrapped. Most of the blueprints were destroyed, but the rumor is one set survived. 808. Her breath caught in her throat. She fumbled with her phone again, her fingers clumsy. She searched for Project 808 Icarus. The results were sparse, mostly conspiracy theory forums and aviation history blogs. But one link stood out, a digitized record from the National Archives. It was a manifest of decommissioned project assets, and there it was. Item 8081C. Description: primary schematic, airframe and propulsion. Location: stored at the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Boneyard, Tucson, Arizona. It wasn't a coordinate for New York City. It was a trick, a test of how she processed information. The latitude and longitude of New York were a red herring, a distraction. The real information was in the code. Your answer. Her answer to his engineering problem wasn't a theory about molecular breakdown. He wanted her to find the source material. He was asking her to find the blueprint for a ghost. But why? And what was she supposed to do now? Call him? She didn't have his number. It felt like another dead end, another cruel game. She looked down at the note again. The paper was thick, expensive. She turned it over. In the dim light of a passing street lamp, she saw something she had missed before. A watermark. It was a stylized letter C, entwined with a pair of wings, the logo for Croft Aeronautics, and below it, almost invisible, was a string of numbers. A phone number. She stared at it all the way to her stop. This was insane. He was a billionaire. She was a waitress who smelled like fried calamari. This was a world she didn't belong in. But then she thought of Leo, his small face pale in his sleep, his breathing sometimes shallow and ragged. She thought of the $5,000 deposit. She thought of the zero on that receipt. He had taken something from her tonight, her hope, her dignity. But he had also left her. This, a puzzle, a chance. After tucking a sleeping Leo into bed, she sat in her cramped living room, the glow of the television casting long shadows on the walls. It was 2 a.m. Her shift at the diner, her second job, started in 4 hours. She took a deep breath and dialed the number. She expected a secretary, an automated system, a deadline. It rang once. Croft. His voice was sharp, alert, as if he had been sitting by the phone waiting for it. Mr. Croft, it's Amelia Tran. There was a pause. You're slower than I expected, he said. It took you 4 hours to bypass the geographic misdirection and decode the archival reference. I had to take the bus, she said, the absurdity of the statement hanging in the air. The schematic, he said, ignoring her comment. What about it? It's in the Boneyard, in Tucson, she replied, her heart hammering against her ribs. That is the publicly available information, he said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. That's what any competent researcher would find. I am not looking for a competent researcher, Amelia. I am looking for someone who sees the details everyone else misses. Look again. Not at the file. At the note I left you. She smoothed the crumpled paper on her coffee table. She stared at the numbers. The letters. 47,728 degree N, 74 to 60 degree W, 808, 1C. What was she missing? She had dismissed the coordinates, but he was telling her to look again. What was at that location in Manhattan? She zoomed in on the map on her phone. It was an intersection of streets. Nothing special. Then she switched to the satellite view. It was a building. A tall, grey, nondescript building. She searched for the address. The building housed the New York branch of the National Archives and Records Administration. It's not in Tucson, she whispered, the realization dawning. The manifest is a decoy. The physical schematic was moved. It's in the archives, in New York. And the second part of the code? He prompted. 8081C. Section 808, Row 1, Cabinet C, she guessed. Close, he said. Level 8, Range 8, Section 1, Compartment C. Very good, Amelia. You see in 3 dimensions. Most people stop at the first answer they find. There was a beat of silence. A car will be outside your apartment in 10 minutes. It will take you to Austin Executive Airport. My jet is waiting. You have a 9 a.m. appointment at the archives tomorrow under the name Eleanor Vance, a researcher from the Department of Defense. Your credentials will be waiting for you. Retrieve the schematic, and only the schematic. Do not speak to anyone more than is necessary. When you have it, you will be given a new set of instructions. The line went dead. Amelia sat in the sudden silence, her mind reeling. A private jet, a fake identity, a top-secret mission to retrieve a Cold War blueprint. This was the stuff of movies, not the life of a single mother from the suburbs. This was a door opening into a world so far removed from her own, it might as well be on another planet. She thought of the risks, the sheer, terrifying insanity of it all. But then she thought of the alternative, another double shift, another condescending remark from Davies, another month of staring at overdue bills, another night of listening to her son's heart beat out its flawed and fragile rhythm. She walked into Leo's room and kissed his forehead. He smelled of milk and sleep. "I'll be back soon, little man," she whispered. "I promise." 10 minutes later, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled up to her curb. Amelia Tran, waitress and single mum, walked out of her old life and into the Ghost's machine. The Croft Aeronautics Gulfstream GS-850 was less an airplane and more a flying testament to the power of capital. Amelia sank into a cream-colored leather seat that cost more than her car. The silence of the cabin, a stark contrast to the rattling city bus. A quiet, efficient flight attendant offered her champagne, which she politely declined, her stomach a tight knot of anxiety. She hadn't been on a plane since her honeymoon with Ben, a budget trip to Florida. This felt like ascending to Olympus. She landed at a private airfield in New Jersey before dawn and was whisked into Manhattan. The credentials waiting for her at the hotel were terrifyingly authentic. A Department of Defense ID with her picture and the name Eleanor Vance, complete with a security clearance level that made her hands sweat. She practiced the name in the mirror. Eleanor Vance. I'm Eleanor Vance. It felt like a lie she was telling herself. The National Archives building was an imposing fortress of granite and bureaucracy. Following Croft's instructions, she presented her ID, her request for Project 808 materials already filed. A stern-faced archivist led her through a series of secure doors into a climate-controlled vault. It smelled of old paper and preservation chemicals. He pointed her to a row of grey metal cabinets. "Level 8, Range 8, Section 1, he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "You have 2 hours." Compartment C was a long, thin metal drawer. Amelia pulled it open. Inside lay a single, rolled-up tube of yellowed canvas, tied with a faded red ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied it and carefully unrolled the blueprint on a large viewing table. It was magnificent. A ghost, indeed. The Icarus drone was a thing of sleek, deadly beauty. A design so far ahead of its time, it looked futuristic even now. The handwriting, the calculations in the margins, the sheer artistry of it was breathtaking. She could almost feel the presence of the engineers who had labored over it decades ago. She was about to roll it back up when something caught her eye. A detail. A small one, in the schematic for the gyroscopic stabilizer, the very system Croft had asked her about. There was a tiny note in the margin, written in a different hand than the rest of the blueprint. It was barely legible, a faint pencil scrawl. Coolant line reroute pending. Proximity to manifold may cause thermal degradation of lubricant V2. There it was. Her wild guess in the restaurant hadn't been a guess at all. It was a ghost of a memory. A seed planted by Ben, brought to life by this decades-old blueprint. The problem wasn't electrolytic reaction. It was simpler, dumber. The engine's own heat was cooking the lubricant, slowly, imperceptibly, breaking it down. The 1.7% loss. A small arrow pointed from the note to an appendix document number, A113. Croft's instructions were clear: retrieve only the schematic. But her intuition, the same instinct that noticed the table vibration, screamed at her. The answer wasn't just the blueprint, it was in the appendix. She went back to the archivist. "I need to see appendix file A113 from the same project," she said, her voice steady, channeling the imaginary authority of Eleanor Vance. The archivist frowned. "That wasn't in your original request." "It's a supplemental file. It should be with the primary documents," she insisted. He grumbled but checked his system. "It's not here. It's restricted, stored off-site, in a different facility." "Where?" Amelia pressed. He squinted at his screen. "The annex, in Virginia." A new set of instructions arrived via a text message on a burner phone she found in her hotel room. "Bring the schematic to the helipad on West 30th Street. 4 p.m. She stood on the wind-swept rooftop, the canvas tube clutched in her hand, the roar of the city a distant hum below. A black helicopter, sleek and menacing like a dragonfly, descended from the sky. The door slid open. Julian Croft was sitting inside. She climbed in, and the helicopter lifted off, banking sharply over the Hudson River. "Did you get it?" he asked over the headset, his eyes fixed on her. She handed him the tube. He unrolled it across his lap, his long fingers tracing the lines of the ghost drone. He didn't seem to notice the note in the margin. "The problem you described," Amelia said, her voice louder than she intended over the rotor wash. "The 1.7% fluid loss, its thermal degradation. A coolant line runs too close to the exhaust manifold. It's noted in the schematic." Croft's eyes flicked to the margin note. He read it, then read it again. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "This note, it references an appendix, A113. Did you retrieve it?" "It wasn't there," Amelia said. "It's in a restricted archive, in Virginia." He was silent for a long moment, staring at the blueprint. The setting sun glinted off the sharp planes of his face. "My engineers have been working on a new hypersonic drone engine for 3 years, he said, his voice low and intense. "It's revolutionary, but we've been plagued by a persistent, untraceable loss of lubricant in the stabilizer. 1.7%. We've designed and redesigned the system a dozen times. We've run countless simulations. We never found the flaw." He looked at her, his grey eyes burning with a frightening intensity. "This blueprint is for a 60-year-old propeller drone. But the gyroscopic stabilizer, the core design, is the foundation for our new engine. My team based their work on a digitized, cleaned-up version of this schematic, a version where a faint pencil note in the margin would have been erased as an imperfection." He rolled up the blueprint. "You didn't just find a ghost, Amelia. You found the original sin. You found the flaw that my entire team of PhDs, with all their advanced technology, missed, because they were looking at a perfect copy, and you went back to the flawed, human original." He leaned back in his seat. "I told you I was looking for an outlier, someone who doesn't follow the path, but questions the map itself. When I told you to retrieve only the schematic, it was a final test. 99 out of 100 people would have followed the order. They would have brought me the tube and considered their job done. But you saw the loose thread, and you pulled. The helicopter began its descent towards a sprawling estate on the coast of Connecticut, a modern palace of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. "I have a proposition for you," Croft said, as the helicopter settled onto a landing pad. "I'm creating a new division at my company, a red team, a small independent unit whose only job is to challenge our primary design teams, to find the flaws nobody else sees, to think analog in a digital world. I want you to run it." Amelia's head was spinning. "Run it? Mr. Croft, I'm a waitress. I don't have a degree. I have a high school diploma and 2 years of community college." "You have something better," he said, turning to face her fully. "You have perspective. You see the wobble in the table, not just the wine in the glass. I can teach you the terminology. I can't teach you how to see." He named a salary that made the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just enough to cover Leo's surgery. It was enough to change their lives forever. Full medical coverage, a relocation package, housing on the estate. "I need an answer, Amelia," he said. "This isn't a job offer. It's a draft notice. Are you in or are you out?" She looked out the window at the magnificent house, at the endless ocean beyond. It was a world of impossible wealth and power, a world where she would be an outsider, an imposter. But it was also a world that held the key to her son's future. "What about Leo?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "His doctors are in Austin. There is a pediatric cardiac specialist at Yale, Dr. Aris Thorne," Croft said without hesitation. "He is the best in the world. I will have him on retainer for Leo by morning." Tears she hadn't even realized were forming began to stream down her face. It was too much. It was a fairy tale, a dream from which she was terrified she would wake up. She looked at Julian Croft, the phantom engineer, the man who had humiliated her, and then handed her the world. She saw not a savior, but a man as lonely and isolated as his cliff-top fortress. A man searching for one true thing in a world of perfect copies. "I'm in," she said. The first few months were a dizzying blur. Leo was transferred to Yale New Haven Hospital, where the renowned Dr. Thorne confirmed the new procedure could change his life. Amelia moved into a guest house on the Croft estate that was larger and more luxurious than any home she had ever imagined. But her new role was a battlefield. She was an anomaly in the sterile, high-tech world of Croft Aeronautics. The engineers with their degrees from MIT and Caltech treated her with a thinly veiled condescension. They called her Croft's Pet Project, or the Waitress. They saw her not as a leader, but as an eccentric billionaire's strange whim. Her red team consisted of 2 other misfits, a retired machinist named Sal, who could build anything from memory, and a young, socially awkward data analyst named Benji, who saw patterns in numbers that others missed. Together, they were a tiny island of analog intuition in a sea of digital certainty. Julian was a demanding, impatient mentor. He gave her books on physics and materials science to read, expecting her to absorb them overnight. He would grill her on schematics, pushing her to find the weak points. But there were moments, late at night in the design lab, when the professional mask would slip. He would talk about his father, an inventor who lost his company to a partner who exploited a tiny design flaw in their flagship product. He trusted the data, not his gut, Julian told her once, his voice quiet. The numbers looked perfect, so he ignored the small signs that something was wrong. By the time the flaw became a catastrophe, it was too late. I will not make the same mistake. Amelia realized then that his obsession with detail wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a shield forged in the fire of a past betrayal. She wasn't just an employee to him. She was his early warning system, his human smoke detector. As she and Julian spent more time together, a fragile, unspoken connection began to form. He would visit Leo in the hospital with her, bringing complex puzzles and models for him to build. He listened, truly listened, when she talked about her life, her fears, her hopes for her son, and she began to see the lonely man behind the formidable intellect. But there was another presence in the house, a shadow that watched Amelia's every move with cold, calculating eyes, Eleanor Vance. It turned out the fake ID Amelia had used was not a random name. Eleanor Vance was the chief operating officer of Croft Aeronautics and Julian's fiancée. She was everything Amelia was not: polished, Ivy League educated, from a family of old money. She moved through the world with an unshakable sense of entitlement, and she viewed Amelia's presence as a personal insult. "She's a novelty, Julian," Eleanor would say, her voice dripping with condescension during their tense dinners. "A little Cinderella project. But you can't seriously think this waitress has anything substantive to contribute. She's going to embarrass you. She's already saved this company $10 million on the hypersonic project," Julian would reply, coolly, not looking up from his plate. Eleanor's hatred for Amelia was a palpable force. She saw her not as a rival for Julian's affection. She believed his heart was as cold and mechanical as his engines, but as a threat to her control. Eleanor was the one who managed the company's operations, the one who translated Julian's genius into profitable reality. Amelia, with her direct line to Julian and her uncanny ability to find flaws, represented chaos, an unpredictable variable in her carefully constructed equation. The day of Leo's surgery arrived. It was a grueling 8-hour procedure. Amelia sat in the waiting room, her hands clenched, while Julian sat with her, foregoing a critical board meeting. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He just sat, a silent, solid presence in the storm of her fear. When Dr. Thorne finally emerged, his face tired but smiling, and said, "It was a complete success," Amelia collapsed into Julian's arms, sobbing with relief. He held her, his hand stroking her hair, and for a moment they were not a boss and an employee, but two people finding solace in each other. It was that moment of vulnerability, witnessed from the hallway by a furious Eleanor Vance, that sealed Amelia's fate. A week later, Amelia was in her small lab, working with Sal and Benji on a new drone landing gear system, when two men in dark suits entered. They were from corporate security. "Amelia Tran?" the lead guard asked. "You need to come with us. Mr. Croft wants to see you in the main boardroom. Now." A cold dread washed over her. She walked into the boardroom, a vast, sterile space dominated by a 40-foot black marble table. Julian stood at the far end, his back to her, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the churning ocean. Eleanor Vance was there, standing beside him, a tablet in her hand, and a look of triumphant pity on her face. "Julian?" Amelia asked, her voice small in the cavernous room. "What's going on?" He turned, and the look on his face stopped her heart. The warmth, the connection they had built over the past months, was gone. His eyes were chips of ice. It was the face of the man she had met in the restaurant. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Find out what?" "Don't play the innocent, Amelia. It's insulting," Eleanor said smoothly. "We know you sold the schematics for the landing gear system to a competitor. Titan Dynamics." Amelia's mouth fell open. "What? No! That's insane. I would never." "We traced the data transfer," Julian said, his voice raw with a pain he was trying to suppress. "It came from your encrypted workstation. Last night at 11:42 p.m., sent to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands." He threw a file across the table. It slid to a stop in front of her. Inside were printouts of network logs, IP addresses, and bank statements. A bank statement in her name, for an account she had never heard of, showing a deposit of $250,000. This is fake," Amelia stammered, tears blurring her vision. "Someone faked this. Eleanor. She's setting me up." "Of course," Eleanor sighed dramatically. "The poor, misunderstood waitress, framed by the evil COO. It's a compelling narrative, but the evidence is absolute." "I trusted you," Julian said, and the words were like shards of glass. "I brought you into my home. I gave you my son's doctor. I let you into my work, my life." He took a step forward, his face a mask of anguish and fury. "My father was destroyed by a betrayal that looked just like this, a trusted colleague who sold his secrets. I swore I would never be that blind. And yet, you made me." "Julian, please," she begged, taking a step toward him. "You have to believe me. Look deeper. Find the flaw in this. That's what you hired me for." "Get out," he whispered. "Security will escort you from the estate. You have 30 minutes to pack a bag. The rest of your things will be sent to you. If you ever try to contact me or set foot on this property again, I will have you prosecuted for corporate espionage to the fullest extent of the law." "What about Leo?" she cried, the world dissolving around her. "He's still in recovery. His medical bills, the insurance." "You should have thought of that before you put a price on my trust," Julian said, turning his back on her. It was the cruelest cut of all. As the guards took her arms and led her from the room, she looked back. Eleanor met her gaze and gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible smile of victory. She was driven to the main gate and left on the side of the road with a single suitcase and a check for 1 month's severance pay. The fairy tale was over. The door to Olympus had been slammed shut, and she was back in the dirt, more alone and more broken than ever before. Amelia checked into a cheap motel, the kind with threadbare carpets and the lingering smell of stale smoke. For 24 hours, she did nothing but stare at the water-stained ceiling, cycling through grief, rage, and a paralyzing fear for Leo's future. The medical insurance provided by Croft Aeronautics would be terminated at the end of the month. The follow-up care, the expensive medications, it was all about to vanish. She had been framed, brilliantly and thoroughly. The digital evidence was a fortress. Julian, with his history, would never look past it. He believed in data, and the data said she was a traitor. Find the flaw in this. She had pleaded with him. Now she knew she was the only one who could. She sat up, her mind starting to work again, pushing through the fog of despair. Eleanor was smart, but she was arrogant. She would have focused on creating a perfect digital illusion. But what about the physical world? The analog world? That was Eleanor's blind spot. It was Amelia's strength. She thought back to the frame-up. The data transfer happened at 11:42 p.m. from her workstation in the Red Team lab. But she had been at the hospital with Leo until well after midnight. She had a sign-out sheet from the pediatric ward to prove it. It was an alibi, but a weak one. Eleanor could claim she'd used a remote access program. No, she needed something physical, something Eleanor had touched, something that couldn't be faked with code. Amelia closed her eyes, replaying the last few weeks in her mind. She thought about the lab, the workstations, the security protocols. There were cameras everywhere, but Eleanor, as COO, could have easily erased the footage of herself entering the lab. The network logs were forged. What was left? And then it came to her. A tiny detail, something she had noticed but dismissed at the time. A few days before the frame-up, she had been in her lab late at night. Eleanor had made a surprise visit, a rare occurrence. She claimed she was there to review their progress, but she seemed distracted, edgy. While she was there, she'd complained of a headache and asked Amelia for some water. Amelia had gotten her a paper cup from the water cooler. Eleanor had taken a few sips, then set the cup down on the edge of a workbench and forgotten it. In the morning, the cleaning crew had thrown it out, but Amelia remembered seeing that cup in the trash can when she came in the next day. She hadn't thought anything of it. But now, it was a wild, desperate long shot. She called the only person at the estate who might help her. Sal, the old machinist from her team. He was fiercely loyal and despised the corporate bureaucracy that Eleanor represented. Sal, it's Amelia. Amy, I heard what happened. It's bull. Total bull. None of us believe it for a second. Sal, I need a favor, a crazy one, she said, her voice low. The night before I was fired, there was a paper cup in the trash can in our lab, a plain white cone cup from the water cooler. Is there any chance at all, that the trash from our lab is handled differently? There was a pause. You know, Sal said slowly, now that you mention it. Yeah, because we sometimes work with sensitive prototypes. All trash from the Red Team lab isn't incinerated. It's put in sealed biohazard bags and stored in a locked shed for 30 days before disposal. It's a stupid protocol Eleanor herself signed off on. Something about protecting intellectual property. Amelia's heart leaped. Eleanor's own paranoia had created the loophole she needed. Sal, I need you to get that bag, the one from 2 nights ago. There's a cup in there. I need it. Getting the cup was one thing. Proving it meant anything was another. She needed more. She needed to connect Eleanor to Titan Dynamics. She spent the next day at a public library, using their computers to dig into Titan's corporate structure. It was a publicly traded company, but a significant portion of it was owned by a series of investment groups. It was a tangled web. Then she found a name that made her go cold. The chairman of Titan's board of directors was Aris Thorne. Dr. Aris Thorne, Leo's heart surgeon, the best in the world whom Julian had put on retainer. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her mind raced. Had Thorne been part of the setup? It seemed impossible. He was a respected surgeon. But then she remembered something else. During one of her visits, Dr. Thorne had mentioned his sister. He'd said she was a brilliant businesswoman, a real shark. He'd even joked, she and my brother-in-law are always competing. Brother-in-law. Amelia's hands shook as she searched for Aris Thorne's family connections. And there it was, a Society page article from a few years back, announcing the marriage of Dr. Aris Thorne's sister to a prominent New York executive. The sister's name was Eleanor Vance. Eleanor wasn't just the COO of Croft Aeronautics. She wasn't just Julian's fiancée. She was Dr. Thorne's sister. And Dr. Thorne was the chairman of the board at the rival company. She had used her own brother, her own family connection, to set up the entire scheme. She'd likely recommended him to Julian, knowing it would make the eventual betrayal cut even deeper. That night, Sal, his face grim, met her in a dimly lit parking lot. He handed her a sealed plastic bag. Inside, among discarded papers and coffee grounds, was the small, white paper cup. The next morning, Amelia walked into the lobby of Croft Aeronautics. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in her simple, clean waitress uniform. It was her armor. It was who she was. She asked to see Julian Croft, The receptionist, recognizing her, immediately called security. "Tell him Amelia Tran has physical evidence regarding the Titan Dynamics breach," she said calmly. "Tell him it's about a paper cup." She was made to wait in a small, glass-walled conference room. 20 minutes later, Julian entered. He looked haggard, older than he had just a few days ago. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask. Eleanor followed him in, a smug, confident smile on her face. "This is pathetic, Julian," Eleanor said. "You're actually entertaining this nonsense?" Amelia placed the plastic bag containing the cup on the table. "Eleanor, you came to my lab 2 nights ago. You drank water from this cup." Eleanor laughed. "I may have. I visit dozens of labs. What's your point?" "My point," Amelia said, looking directly at Julian, "is that a data transfer requires a person. The digital logs can be faked, but the person cannot. Your security system is state-of-the-art. It includes biometric scanners on all high-security workstations, including mine. A fingerprint is required for any encrypted data transfer." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. "I have my hospital sign-out sheet proving I was with my son at 11:42 p.m., Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength. "But more importantly, this cup has Eleanor's fingerprints and her DNA on it. I'm asking you to run a forensic check on the biometric log for my workstation at the exact time of the breach. I'm willing to bet the fingerprint used for that transfer doesn't belong to me. I'm betting it belongs to the person who was physically in my lab, drinking from this cup." Eleanor's smile faltered. That's ridiculous. She could have lifted my print." "And the final piece," Amelia said, sliding a printout of the article about Eleanor's family across the table. "The chairman of Titan Dynamics is Aris Thorne, your brother. The same Dr. Thorne you had Julian hire for my son. You didn't just frame me. You used my sick child as a pawn in your game to seize control of this company." The silence in the room was absolute. Julian looked from the cup to the article, and then to Eleanor. The color drained from her face. The intricate web of her digital lies was being unraveled by a simple paper cup and a piece of gossip from a society page. The analog details she had overlooked. Julian walked slowly to the intercom on the conference table. "Peterson," he said, his voice a low growl. "Seal this room, and get our forensics team to the Red Team lab. I want a full analysis of the biometric scanner from Workstation Alpha. Compare it to the DNA on a cup Miss Vance is about to provide." He turned to Eleanor, and the ice in his eyes was cold enough to cause frostbite. "You will cooperate, or you will spend the rest of your life in a legal battle that will strip you of everything you have ever owned." Eleanor Vance, for the first time since Amelia had met her, looked terrified. The aftermath was not a sudden, happy ending. It was a slow, messy unwinding. The forensic evidence proved conclusively that Eleanor's fingerprint had been used to authorize the transfer. She was fired, and Julian's lawyers began the brutal process of legal action against both her and Titan Dynamics. The engagement was, of course, broken. The company was thrown into turmoil as the scandal broke. Julian came to her motel room 2 days later. He didn't bring flowers or apologies on a silver platter. He just stood in the doorway, looking tired and broken. "The first time we met," he said, his voice hoarse, "I created a test for you because I was afraid of being betrayed. And then I let myself be betrayed because I trusted the data instead of the person. I failed my own test." "We all have our blind spots," Amelia said quietly. "I'm reinstating your employment, obviously," he said, "and your salary will be doubled. Your housing, Leo's medical care, everything will be restored." He paused. "But that's not enough. I destroyed your reputation. I hurt you. I don't know how to fix that." "You fix it by learning to trust your gut again," Amelia said, looking him in the eye, "and by letting me get back to work." She didn't move back into the guest house immediately. She found a small, modest apartment in town. She needed her own space, a place to heal. Leo's recovery was steady, his new heart growing stronger every day. Amelia's red team became one of the most vital divisions at Croft Aeronautics. Her reputation was no longer that of the waitress, but of the woman who saw the truth when no one else could. About 6 months later, Julian appeared at her apartment door. He wasn't holding a file or a schematic. He was holding a small, slightly lopsided model of the Icarus drone, clearly made from a hobby kit. "Leo and I made it," he said, a faint, shy smile on his face. "He wanted you to have it. He said you're the only one who knows how to find ghosts." He looked at her, his guard finally, completely down. "I don't want to be your boss anymore, Amelia. I want to be your partner." "In what?" she asked, a smile touching her own lips. "In everything," he said, "starting with dinner. There's a little Italian place I know. The tables are a bit wobbly, but I have a feeling you'll know just how to fix them." Amelia looked at the man before her, a man who had tested her, fired her, and ultimately come to see her for exactly who she was. She thought of the 0 on the receipt, a symbol of worthlessness that had become the start of everything. She had been a waitress, serving the rich. Now she was a woman who had saved an empire, not with a degree or a pedigree, but with the simple, powerful act of paying attention. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her life was just beginning.